The simple shoelace trick that made a black Marine hold off 800 enemies for 9 hours. Firebase Kestrel. Sergeant Elijah Vance, known as Eli to his closest squad mates, wasn't one for grand pronouncements. He was a man of quiet competence, his experience etched into the lines around his eyes, and the economy of his movements. He'd seen tours in dusty, forgotten corners of the world, each one adding another layer of grit to his already formidable resolve. Now, he found himself in the desolate outpost of Firebase Kestrel, a dilapidated cluster of sandbags and corrugated iron perched precariously on a strategic ridge in the heart of a conflict zone. Firebase Kestrel was supposed to be a temporary observation post, a fly on the wall in a larger, more complex theater of war. Its primary asset was its commanding view of the Kalandar Pass, a narrow choke point through which any significant enemy movement would have to traverse. Eli's squad, a tight-knit group of 6 Marines, had been assigned to Kestrel for what felt like an eternity, monitoring the arid landscape for any signs of the separatist faction, the Al-Qadim. The intelligence reports had been vague, conflicting at times. Whispers of a major consolidation of Al-Qadim forces in the region had reached them, dismissed by higher command as exaggerated local propaganda. "Stay vigilant but don't overreact," their CO had radioed a week prior, his voice crackling with static and a sense of detached assurance that felt increasingly out of place. Eli, however, trusted his gut more than satellite imagery. He'd seen that particular calm before, the kind that precedes the storm. His team consisted of Lance Corporal Miller, a sharpshooter with an unnerving calm under pressure, Private First Class Garcia, their comms specialist, whose nervous energy belied a fierce loyalty, and 3 others who were equally reliable if a little less experienced. They were few, but they were hardened. They'd turned Kestrel from a ruin into a defensible position, reinforcing sandbags, digging shallow trenches and establishing overlapping fields of fire. Still, Eli knew their efforts were a mere bandage on a gaping wound if the intelligence about a massing enemy force proved true. The air that evening was unusually still, heavy with the scent of dust and distant diesel fumes. The sun dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and bruised purple, a grim prophecy. Eli stood at the main firing position, binoculars scanning the darkening valleys. He saw at first, not a flicker of light, not a movement, but an absence. The usual nocturnal animal sounds were gone. The desert had gone silent. "Garcia, get command on the horn. Tell them I'm reporting unusual activity." "Dead silence out there. And tell Miller to ready the DMR." Eli's voice was low, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Before Garcia could even key his radio, a distant rhythmic thumping began. It was faint at first, like a heartbeat far away, then growing louder, more insistent. It was the sound of hundreds of boots on dry earth. Eli dropped the binoculars, grabbing his M4A1. "Contact. Multiple closing fast," he yelled, his voice echoing across the small firebase. The first rounds cracked overhead, followed by the distinctive chatter of AK-47s. Green tracers arced through the twilight, illuminating the approaching horde. There weren't just dozens, there were hundreds. A wave of humanity, armed and resolute, swarming towards Kestrel from every direction. "Ambush! We're being flanked." Miller's voice was tight with adrenaline as he laid down suppressive fire. The fight was instant, brutal. Eli's squad, though outnumbered, fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves. Every round counted. Explosions rocked the outpost as incoming RPGs found their marks, sending shrapnel whistling through the air. One caught Garcia's radio, silencing his plea for help. Another took out one of their machine gun nests. Eli was everywhere, barking orders, laying down precise bursts, pulling a wounded Marine to cover. But the tide was overwhelming. He saw Miller go down, a flash of pain in his eyes as he crumpled. Garcia, his comms destroyed, was still firing, a defiant snarl on his face, until he too was swallowed by the chaos. One by one, his men fell. Eli, disoriented by a nearby blast, found himself scrambling through the smoke and dust, his rifle still hot in his hand. He took refuge in a small, partially collapsed observation bunker, its reinforced concrete offering a sliver of hope against the onslaught. He peered through a narrow firing slit, his heart pounding a grim rhythm against his ribs. He was alone. Outside, the enemy forces, the Al-Qadim, swarmed over what remained of Firebase Kestrel. Their triumphant shouts filled the night, a chilling chorus of victory. They weren't just hundreds, they were an entire company, possibly more, 800 men perhaps, as the initial dismissed reports had hinted, and they were all focused on the smoldering ruins, hunting for any remaining resistance. Eli checked his ammunition, 2 full magazines for his M4A1, 1 half empty, a handful of grenades, a combat knife. That was it. He was wounded, a nasty gash across his forehead blurring his vision, and his left arm throbbed with a dull ache. He knew what this was, a last stand. 9 hours until dawn, 9 hours against 800 enemies. A grim smile touched his lips. He wasn't going to make it easy for them. He was going to make them bleed for every inch. If you're gripped by Eli's courage and want to follow his incredible fight for survival against impossible odds, be sure to subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and ingenuity. Your support helps us share these powerful narratives. The shouts outside intensified, a celebratory dying that grated on Eli's nerves. He could hear them moving through the ruins of Kestrel, systematically searching, ensuring no one was left to report their triumph. Eli pressed himself against the cold concrete of the bunker, his breathing shallow, trying to blend with the night's silence. His wounds pulsed, a constant reminder of the brutal reality he now faced. The adrenaline which had fueled his initial defense was starting to recede, leaving him with a gnawing exhaustion. He knew he couldn't stay hidden for long. They would find him eventually, and when they did, it would be over. Eli wasn't ready for it to be over. Not yet. He had to buy time, inflict maximum damage, and perhaps, just perhaps, survive until dawn. But how? 800 against 1. It was an impossible equation. His gaze fell to his boots, then to the tattered remnants of a fallen comrade's gear. Shoelace, strong synthetic laces, often overlooked, yet incredibly versatile. A memory surfaced, a training exercise from years ago, a survival course in a dense jungle. His instructor, a grizzled old gunnery sergeant, had stressed the importance of improvisation, of seeing tools in the mundane. A shoelace ain't just for tying boots, Vance, he barked. It's a lifeline, a trap, a weapon, if you got the brains to use it. Eli had an idea, a desperate, audacious plan born of necessity. It wasn't a magic bullet, but it was some. He carefully untied the laces from his boots, then from a pair on a discarded combat boot nearby. He now had 4 lengths of strong cord, each about 2 feet long. His mind raced, calculating, plan. The bunker itself was small, with only 2 narrow firing slits, one facing east, towards the Kalandar Pass, the other north. The entrance, partially blocked by rubble, was a gaping weakness. Eli started by securing his remaining M4 magazine. He used a length of shoelace to loop around the base of 2 magazines, tying them together in a jungle-style configuration, allowing for quicker, more seamless reloads. He tied another to a grenade pin, creating a crude lanyard he could easily yank without fumbling in the dark. Small efficiencies perhaps, but in a prolonged firefight, every second, every movement mattered. Then came the trick that would turn his desperate defense into a protracted nightmare for the enemy. He moved to the bunker entrance, carefully clearing a path through the rubble, creating just enough space for him to slip in and out if absolutely necessary. He tied one end of a shoelace to a jagged piece of rebar sticking out of the concrete wall, then threaded the other end across the entrance, just inches off the ground. To this tripwire he subtly attached a few empty shell casings he'd scavenged, along with a couple of small loose rocks. A rudimentary alarm system. Anyone entering would trigger it, sending a small cascade of noise before they even knew what hit them. He repeated the process near the firing slits, extending invisible lines outwards into the dark, attaching more improvised noisemakers, a snapped plastic canteen, a bent piece of metal. He worked silently, methodically, his marine training kicking in, turning fear into focus. It was a crude, low-tech early warning system, relying on the enemy's overconfidence and the cover of darkness. The shoelace trick wasn't a single spectacular maneuver, but a series of small interconnected improvisations that would maximize his meager resources. The first test came sooner than he expected. A shadow detached itself from the encroaching darkness, moving silently towards the bunker entrance. Eli held his breath, his M4 raised, safety off. He heard a faint scuff, then the distinct clink of metal, followed by the clatter of rock. The noisemakers Eli had rigged. The shadow froze. Eli didn't hesitate. 3 rapid shots ripped through the firing slit, a choked cry, and the shadow collapsed. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the enemy's confusion. They knew someone was there, but how had they been detected? The shoelace trick had worked. It had bought him precious seconds, giving him the element of surprise. The enemy reacted with renewed caution, but also with fury. More figures emerged, spreading out, trying to encircle the bunker. Eli moved to the north slit, hearing a faint rustle he recognized as another tripwire disturbance. He fired, not necessarily to kill, but to deter, to sow doubt. The shoelaces were turning his small bunker into a porcupine, bristling with unseen threats. He started thinking about expanding his perimeter, even if by a few yards. He had one more shoelace, carefully. He used it to tie a sharp piece of rebar, about a foot long, to a small loose plank of wood, creating a makeshift, silent alarm to be propped just outside one of the less used entrance points. It was a subtle, almost invisible barrier that would force anyone touching it to reconsider their approach or make a noise that would betray their position. The shoelace trick wasn't just about the physical wires, it was about the mental game. It was about creating an illusion of a larger, more active defense, forcing the 800 enemies to believe they were up against more than just one lone, desperate Marine. As the first hour of his 9-hour ordeal drew to a close, Eli felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. He was still alive, and he had just shown them that this wasn't going to be easy. Eli's ingenuity is a testament to the Marine spirit. If you're impressed by his quick thinking and resourcefulness, hit the like button to show your appreciation for his incredible battle. The night deepened, bringing with it a chilling dampness that seeped into Eli's bones. The initial shock of the ambush had given way to a grinding, exhausting reality. The enemy, stung by their unexpected losses at the bunker's perimeter, had shifted tack. No longer were they blindly rushing, now they were probing, testing, trying to understand how one man could be so elusive, so deadly. The rhythmic thud of mortar rounds began, designed to flush him out or bury him alive. The bunker, though resilient, shuddered with each impact, sending dust and small chunks of concrete raining down. Eli hunkered low, waiting for lulls, always listening for the telltale clink or scuff of his shoelace alarms. His system, simple as it was proving remarkably effective. The tripwires, invisible in the moonless night, consistently bought him vital seconds. A slight tug, a rustle of scavenged tin, and Eli would pivot, his M4 snapping to attention, sending rounds into the darkness. He wasn't aiming for kills with every shot now, his ammunition was too precious. Instead, he targeted perceived threats, the source of the noise, forcing the enemy to fall back to reconsider. The shoelaces weren't just for tripwires. He had used one to secure a piece of jagged metal, creating a crude but effective barrier over a low access point that the enemy had tried to exploit. Another was used to keep his water bottle securely tethered to his vest, preventing it from clanking against his gear as he moved, preserving precious silence. He even used a small section to firmly bind a flashlight, scavenged from a fallen comrade, to the side of his M4, allowing for quick momentary bursts of light when identifying targets, without needing a dedicated weapon light. Time became a blurred cut. It was a succession of firefights, adrenaline surges, and moments of strained silence, punctuated by the relentless sounds of the enemy. He could hear them talking, their voices a low guttural murmur outside, sometimes closer than he liked. He imagined them, hundreds of them, milling around, increasingly frustrated by the invisible defender. His body screamed in protest, the gash on his forehead oozed, his left arm ached with every movement, and his muscles throbbed from the constant tension. Thirst was a constant companion, his mouth dry and gritty, but his mind, surprisingly, remained sharp. He focused on the immediate, the tactical: reload, listen, breathe, fire, repeat. He learned their patterns. They would attack in small groups, trying to draw his fire, revealing his position. Then a larger group would attempt to flank, but the shoelace network, though partially compromised over hours of relentless assault, continued to give him the edge. Sometimes he would even hear the enemy cursing as one of them tripped, alerting Eli to their presence. He saw one particularly aggressive Al-Qadim fighter, a man with a distinctive scar, trying to circumvent his main defenses by crawling through a gap in the rubble he hadn't fully secured. Eli waited, his breath held, his sights trained. The man was almost through when his elbow brushed against a cleverly placed shoelace, causing a small metallic thud. Eli fired. The scar-faced fighter screamed, then fell silent. One less to worry about. Hours passed, 3, then 5, then 7. The night seemed endless, a suffocating blanket of combat and survival. Eli conserved his last grenade, a final resort. His M4 was almost out of ammunition. He began to consider his combat knife, running its edge along his thumb, its cold steel a familiar comfort. He was down to his last magazine, maybe 20 rounds left. He was exhausted, beyond tired. He felt the phantom pains of Miller and Garcia, their sacrifices echoing in his mind. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for them, for the memory of Firebase Kestrel, for the principle that one man could, indeed, make a difference, even against impossible odds. The enemy, growing desperate, began to throw everything they had at the bunker. They tried to smoke him out, ignite fires with incendiary rounds. The air grew thick with acrid smoke, burning Eli's lungs, making his eyes water. He coughed, but held his ground, firing his remaining rounds sparingly, making each one count, each one a defiant shout in the face of overwhelming force. He knew dawn was approaching, but whether he would see it, or if it would bring salvation or merely a clearer view of his end, he didn't know. All he knew was the fight, and the shoelaces, his silent guardians in the dark. Eli's unwavering resolve and ingenious tactics against such overwhelming odds are truly inspiring. Share your thoughts on his incredible endurance and resourcefulness in the comments below. What do you think sustained him through those grueling hours? As the first faint streaks of gray began to paint the eastern sky, Eli Vance was a ghost of his former self. His uniform was torn and smoke-stained, his face smeared with dirt, sweat and dried blood. His body was a symphony of aches and pains, each muscle screaming for respite. His M4 lay beside him, its magazine empty, its barrel still warm from the last desperate bursts of fire. He had fired his final rounds just minutes ago, repelling what felt like the 100th probe of the night. The shoelace tripwires were largely gone now, either severed by enemy movement or destroyed by explosions. His improvised noisemakers were shattered, scattered shards of metal and plastic, but their legacy remained. They had served their purpose, creating confusion, delaying the enemy, and buying him the precious time he needed to survive the night. He still had one shoelace tied around his wrist, a simple knot reminding him of the improbable struggle. He gripped his combat knife, its cold steel a stark contrast to his burning skin. He was ready. This was it. The enemy would come in force with the light, and he would meet them, one last time. There was a strange clarity in his exhaustion, a calm accept. Then a sound cut through the pre-dawn silence. It wasn't the guttural shouts of the Al-Qadim, nor the crackle of their small arms. It was a distant, familiar roar, the unmistakable thrum of rotor blades, growing louder, closer. Helicopters, American helicopter. A wave of disbelief, then a surge of raw, unadulterated hope, coursed through Eli. He hadn't dared to dream of rescue. He was ready to fight to the last breath, but the thought of living, of seeing another sunrise was almost overwhelming. The Al-Qadim, hearing the same sound, reacted with panicked shouts. Their relentless assault faltered, then broke. They knew what the sound meant. Air support. They scattered, melting back into the shadows of the past they had so confidently emerged from hours before. Eli pushed himself up, wincing as his wounds protested. He stumbled towards the firing slit, peering out as the first of the helicopters, a heavy assault transport, loomed into view, its powerful searchlights cutting through the gloom. It hovered, then descended, Marines fast roping down, their silhouettes stark against the emerging dawn. A small team converged on the bunker, their weapons raised, moving with practiced efficiency. "Marine, is anyone in there?" A voice boomed, amplified by a loudspeaker. Eli rasped, "Sergeant Vance, USMC." The lead Marine, a lieutenant, entered cautiously, his weapon sweeping the interior. He found Eli slumped against the wall, his knife still in his hand, his eyes weary but defiant. "My God," the lieutenant breathed, seeing the spent casings, the makeshift barricades, the evidence of a night-long single-handed war. "We got your distress call, faded out, thought for sure you were overrun." "Yeah," Eli croaked,
a weak smile touching his lips, almost what. As the medics moved in, treating his wounds, Eli watched the rising sun cast its golden light over the pass. The ground around Firebase Kestrel was littered with the bodies of the enemy, a stark testament to the ferocity of the fight. The lieutenant, surveying the scene, noticed the remnants of Eli's ingenious defense, the half-buried tripwires, the shattered noisemakers, the carefully positioned pieces of debris that had formed an invisible barrier. "What in the hell is all this, Sergeant?" the lieutenant asked, genuinely perplexed. Eli pointed to a fragment of a shoelace still tied to a piece of rebar. "Just an old trick, sir, kept him honest." The story of Sergeant Elijah Vance's 9-hour stand against 800 enemies, held at bay by a simple shoelace trick, quickly became legend among the troops. It wasn't just his incredible courage, but his ingenuity, his ability to transform the most mundane objects into instruments of survival, that resonated deeply. He had shown that even when utterly outnumbered, resourcefulness and an unbreakable will could turn the tide. He wasn't a man of grand pronouncements, but his actions that night spoke volumes, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a warrior who refused to yield. His shoelaces, unassuming and easily overlooked, had woven a web of defense that baffled an overwhelming enemy, saving his life and becoming a symbol of the creative intelligence that often shines brightest in the darkest hours of conflict. Sergeant Vance's story is a powerful reminder that heroism isn't always about brute force, but often about cunning and an unbreakable spirit. If you're moved by stories of human resilience and ingenious survival, subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives of courage and determination. Join our community and never miss an inspiring tale.